Welcome back to On the Ball, the sports podcast from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. I'm Andrew Maraniss, and our guest today is Braden Brown, who's joining us from BYU, where he's the director of mental health at BYU Athletics. I saw a post that Braden had done on LinkedIn about the importance of mindfulness for student athletes or for all athletes, and it really grabbed my attention. And so, Braden, thank you so much for joining us from Provo today.
I'm happy to be here, Andrew. I appreciate the opportunity. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And a little bit more about Braden. He played football at BYU, where he was a offensive lineman and was in camp with the St. Louis Rams. He's got degrees from BYU, from Utah State, and his PhD from East Carolina. He was at IUPUI before coming back home, I guess, to Utah, to BYU. And I was reading an article about you, Braden, earlier today, and it mentioned when you were a kid, you were involved in a really serious house fire that you could have died in. And I was wondering if you could tell us that story, because I'm sure it has shaped your life, that experience, in ways that maybe even become more clear the older you get. I think about your career as, helping others. And I was curious, after you tell us the specifics of that story, in what ways that experience might have shaped your the way you see the world and what you want to do with your life.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about it. Just kind of the context of the situation. So my dad had graduated with a degree, both a bachelor's and master's degree in accounting from BYU, and then he was pursuing a PhD in accounting. And I kind of give him a hard time even to this day because I'm like, I can't think of a more nerdy thing to do than go get a PhD in accounting. And so he was, I think, in his first semester of his PhD program in accounting at University of Washington, and it was a January night, and it was interesting because when I was a kid, I used to wake up and I was super thirsty all the time, and so this particular night, I woke up to go get a drink of water from our kitchen, and all of our rooms were upstairs. So I'm walking down the stairs, and I see kind of this light flickering, and I just assume that my dad's working late or something, and as I get closer to the bottom of the stairs, I realize, holy cow, our living room is on fire. And so I run upstairs as a little, scared 4-year-old, and I run into my parents' room, and my dad shoots out of bed, and he runs downstairs and kind of sees the severity of the situation. He calls 911, and then him, my mom, my older brother, who was about 5 at the time, my younger sister, who was just about to turn 2, and then my baby brother Trevor, was just a little 1-year-old at the time. And so my mom went and gathered the rest of the kids. Everyone got out, left the house to get to safety. And then as my parents are standing there, they look at each other and they say, "Where's Braden?" And so what had happened was once I woke up my parents, I went and hid in my sister's closet because I was just a little scared 4-year-old.
Mhm.
My family got out. My dad had essentially run back into the house, and my memory of everything that happened is a little bit fragmented, but there's a few parts that I remember pretty vividly. And I remember hearing my dad scream my name, and I couldn't really see anything, and it was hard to hear because all the cracking of the fire and there was smoke everywhere. And I remember my dad. I told him that I was where I was, and then I told him I'm scared, and he said I'm scared too, but we got to get out of here. And so ultimately what he did is he tried holding me the best he could like a football, and I was a big kid, and so he had jumped our whole stairwell because it was fully engulfed in flames at that point in time, and kind of slid me towards the front door when we landed. And then I remember, once we got outside of the house, I look up at my dad, and his whole hair and face and body is just basically charred and bloody. And it was not to be too dramatic, but it was a pretty impactful and quite frankly traumatic experience for me and my family at that time. And my dad ended up spending 3 months in the burn ICU and in the hospital, and was given like a 30% chance to live, and they were going to have to amputate a bunch of his fingers because his hands were so badly burnt, and they ended up doing a few skin grafts. And I spent a couple weeks in the hospital just because of I got a few minor burns and smoke inhalation. But yeah, kind of bringing it full circle. I didn't really realize how that would affect me as I've kind of gone into my career and just developed throughout my life. But I think that from that early time in my life, it really kind of emphasize the importance of helpers and how important people can be in helping other people just in times of need. And my family needed a lot of help in that time, and kind of our church congregation at the time rallied around us and was able to help provide a lot of financial support for my parents, which was really really beneficial. Crazy that you asked me about this story, and then I'll end there to not take the whole
Mhm.
time telling this. But recently, I contacted a gentleman here in Utah on Facebook Marketplace because I was trying to get a Bear Bachmeyer jersey for my 11-year-old daughter. That's one of her main gifts she asked for Christmas, a signed Bear Bachmeyer jersey. I
Okay.
couldn't find any anywhere, and so I finally came across this random guy on Facebook, and then he calls me, and it's a Bellevue, Washington number. And then we just got to talking, and I'm like, "So, what are your ties to Bellevue?" And it turns out, long story short, that his family, his parents, and him and his wife and their young kids were in the same church congregation, and they remembered vividly the house fire and the family that was involved in that house fire, and they kind of helped contribute financially to help support my family. So that was just
Wow.
such a bizarre coincidence and just full circle moment, but really, really cool.
Man, that's incredible coincidence. Wow. Well, I saw in the article that I read that the firefighters told your dad if they had been there already, what they would have told him not even to go in the house. It was too dangerous. So I imagine what a traumatic experience. It's like a I think you mentioned that look the helpers and being a helper. I remember the was it Mr. Rogers who
Yeah.
counseled kids, right? Look for the helpers in the scary situations. All right. So, as a kid, a little older than that, when did football become a part of your life?
Yeah, it's funny. I tell this story and people are surprised, but I tell it anyway. But I first got into football when I was 7, and it was tackle football. Because I don't even know if flag football was even a thing back in those days. And
Mhm.
actually, when I first started playing football, I actually strongly disliked football. I was not a
Okay.
fan of it. I didn't like being out in the heat and having all the heavy pads and helmet and all that stuff on. And I think I complained a lot that first couple of years. And so I was actually probably my best sport when I first started getting involved in athletics was baseball. My dad was a pitcher for BYU,
Okay.
pretty talented baseball player. And so he kind of got me and my older brother into baseball from a young age. And that was probably my first love. And then I actually gravitated more towards basketball. And to this day, basketball is still probably my favorite sport, even though I injure myself every time I play. So I've had to semi-retire. And then I think ultimately I just kind of realized, I was blessed with a really big frame. And I realized that, if I wanted to pursue sports at the collegiate or professional level, which is something that I was interested in from a young age, that football was kind of like my highest ceiling. And so that's when I played 3 sports in high school, but I always kind of knew that football was going to be the ticket that gave me the most opportunity. And so I kind of eventually gravitated mostly towards football, but I loved being a multi-sport athlete and thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a dad of a 12-year-old athlete, and you hear and read about the coaches who know what they're talking about always encourage kids to play multiple sports, not to specialize too early. All right, so you're really the first BYU fan I've ever had a chance to talk to. So I'm just curious. When I was growing up, I'm a lot older than you. Like BYU was always in the Holiday Bowl, and there were always like these really high scoring Holiday Bowl games. I think about like Robbie Bosco, right, or Steve Young and Jim McMahon. Like, what was it like in your house? Who were the big heroes you had growing up? That your dad had played there. I'm sure BYU sports was a big part of your family's life. Like, what was the lore or some of the names that meant a lot to you growing up?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I grew up coming to BYU football games, not all games, but quite a few football games every year. And one person in particular, and it's just so weird how life works out because he actually has a daughter that's competing here as an athlete now on the soccer team. But Ryan Denny, he was a defensive end here, and those are my positions during my little league career was like offensive line, defensive end because I was always twice the weight limit, and they put a big X on my helmet so I didn't try to run the ball and hurt other people, I guess. But I loved Ryan Denny. I chose number 92 my whole little league career because that was his number. And I remember I can't remember what year it was, but it was a big game against University of Utah. That's our big in-state rival. And we had beat them, and it kind of came down to the wire, like most of those games do. And after the game, we walked out onto the field, and I remember I had to find Ryan Denny, and I was probably like 10 or 11 at the time. And I went up to him and he shook my hand and rubbed my head. And I was like, that was the coolest moment of my life because that was my idol, And now, I get to brush shoulders with his daughter and I see him and it's just, now he's just not just, but he's a high school football coach. And it's just interesting how things change over time. But Ryan Denny was a huge idol of mine. I love Brandon Doman also. He was a quarterback and then he ended up being my offensive coordinator for a couple of years here at BYU. And then outside of that, I wasn't really, Steve, obviously Steve Young. My dad actually worked with Steve Young for a number of years. So I've gotten to know Steve over the years. Just a really great guy. But yeah, just a lot of legends at BYU.
For sure. All right, so let's getting back to the topic at hand. Um, what was your experience with just the mental side of the game as an athlete yourself? And at what point did you start thinking that might be something I might like to do as a career?
I smile ear to ear anytime someone asks me that question because if you talk to any of my teammates from my high school days or my collegiate playing days, and they find out that I'm now the director of mental health and I'm the one who's helping people with the mental side, the reaction is usually like, wait, you are the one who's helping people with mental stuff? Um, and I kind of just view it as, it was different time, different context, different needs, and I've kind of evolved. But and now the athletes that I work with have a hard time seeing me be that version of myself because they kind of view me as just like this, chill guy or whatever. But I'm like, you'd be
What was the
surprised.
college version of yourself?
I was, in the words of one of my football players recently, he said, "I heard that you used to low key be a little unhinged." No, no, no. He said, "I heard you used to low key be a crash out," and I was like. You'll have to explain that in my lingo because I don't understand what that means. And he goes, like a psycho. And I said, well, let me tell you something. There's nothing really low key about that. And he's like, I can't even imagine that. And I'm like, I reframe it as I was just a very competitive and very passionate person. And I got after it and I knew how to flip the switch. So
Yeah. That's right. All right. So was it during your playing days that you envisioned that this you could flip a switch again and move into this career? How did that happen?
yeah, so that's what I tell everyone. I'm like, look, I didn't get into this career because I had it all figured out on the mental side. In fact, that's probably by far what I struggle with more than anything else was learning how to effectively manage and navigate some of the mental side of sport and life. And that's ultimately, I guess, why I was so enamored by going into this field is it was kind of a way of me being able to give back and to pay it forward and to help athletes of this generation do it a lot better than how I did it. Because I look back on my career and I'm like, all the coulda, woulda, shouldas, but that's always the thing I come back to is, man, if I could have just learned how to not be so dang hard on myself all the time and learn how to just bounce back from mistakes a little bit more effectively and learned, how to talk to myself more constructively, that could have been, uh, a really big game changer for me. So that's ultimately, I think, why I was so drawn to the field. I always thought that I was done playing football or sports that I was going to go into the coaching profession just because, being an athlete my whole life, it's an environment that was really familiar and comfortable for me. And I kind of like the idea of working with people. And I feel like I'm a people person. And, this concept or idea of helping people develop into better versions of themselves, that was something that I thought I could be good at and would be fulfilling to me. And then I had a conversation with Bronco Mendenhall, my head coach, and he kind of through a couple different conversations helped me understand that maybe the coaching profession isn't something that I wanted to get into for a number of different reasons. And then I was kind of at a point in my life where I really had no idea what I was going to do. I'd put all my eggs, so to speak, into the sport basket, and then once that came to an end in St. Louis, after I had my back surgery, I was kind of lost in life. And then it was my wife who I refer to as my better three-fourths. She was the first person who said, have you ever thought about going into the therapy world and being a therapist? And my initial reaction was, okay, here I am as this 6'6", 317 pound at the time, offensive tackle, macho man kind of dude. It's like I'm going to go from that setting and that persona to now sitting in a room talking about feelings and emotions. Like people are going to think I'm a weirdo. But then I thought about it and I'm like, it's actually it's not a whole lot different than being a coach. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of how I view what I do now as I'm a coach for mental health. I'm a coach for mental performance. I'm a coach for relationship dynamics. And so it's interesting how it's kind of turned out that way. Most of my athletes actually refer to me as Coach B or Coach Braden, so it's kind of
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah. All right. So before I ask you about the mindfulness topic, I think it would be interesting for people to understand. And I've interviewed some of our mental health coaches here at Vanderbilt as well, but like just the gamut of types of discussions you might have over the course of a day. I'm sure some of it might relate to what we would consider like mental health. I don't know if conditions is the right word, but like depression or anxiety and those types of things. Others might be more specific to sports performance. And you mentioned relationships. Like, does each, do you deal with all three of or more of those types of situations? Do you break it down into different specialties among your staff, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here at BYU, we kind of have the mental health team and the mental performance team, and I'm the director of the mental health team. Um, but I also have I play a role in mental performance with a couple of the specific teams here. So for football and gymnastics, and then a couple of other teams, I primarily do mental performance and a little bit of mental health, just kind of depending on what the needs are of the specific athlete. And then we have a couple of other licensed clinical therapists. And the way that we kind of have it structured is that any athlete from any sport can meet with any of us. And we think it's really important for athletes to have a choice and flexibility in who they work with because some people might drive really well with me and some people might drive, a lot better with Holly, our other therapist. And so we want our athletes to have options and choices. But yeah, to answer your question, it's interesting. I've been asked this question a lot in terms of what's the breakdown between like mental performance versus mental health. And I don't know that I have a great answer because in my mind, there's a lot of overlap between the two. And
Mhm.
it's interesting because people that come in here that want to talk about mental performance, that's usually kind of the gateway to uncover some of the more mental health related stuff or
Yeah.
relationship issues that are kind of also contributing to some of this performance in their or detrimental performance in their sport. So I feel like I have the best job in the world because I have a combination of, one-on-one visits with athletes from gymnastics, swim and dive, basketball, football, track and field, and then I also try to spend as much time as I can in the environment where the team trains. So practice, weight room, or at the competition itself. So on the sideline with the football team or on the floor with the gymnastics team when they compete. And man, it's the coolest job in the world, and I'm just so grateful to be able to do it.
Yeah, I can only imagine, and especially at a place that means so much to you and your family. Okay, so this article that you posted, hopefully you remember it. It was based on a study of a set of 30 different other studies, and it said of all things like it says in a world obsessed with confidence, self-talk, motivation, actually, as mindfulness had the strongest positive effect on performance. Um, so when you think of mindfulness in a sports performance setting, like what does mindfulness look like? Is it something that's taking place at that moment when you step in the batter's box and the pitch is on the way? Is it more of a way of life? Is it both? Like how does mindfulness work for an athlete?
That's such a great question. Short answer, and then I'll kind of dive into just some of the definitions that I've adapted and or adopted and really been drawn to over the past few years that I've been doing this. But I think it's kind of more of an essence or way of life of really trying to be present where you are, focused on things that are within your control without judgment. So one of the favorite definitions that I've heard is John Kabat-Zinn. He's kind of viewed as one of the more pioneers in the mindfulness movement, but his definition is it's the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And so you can kind of break that down into four different stages or steps. But how that actually applies to the sporting world, and I love this because it's one of my favorite videos of Kobe Bryant, and I'm a big Kobe Bryant fan. He talks about it as it's a video of Jay Shetty, and I can share it with you so you can share it with listeners. But essentially, what he says is, what I try to do is be still. Emotions come and go, feelings come and go. The important thing is to accept them all, to embrace them all. Then you can choose to do with them what you want. And the fascinating thing about Kobe in that statement is he worked for a number of years with another stud in the field of performance psychology, but George Mumford. He wrote the book The Mindful Athlete, and he spent 6 seasons with the Chicago Bulls back when they won their six championships. And then Phil Jackson brought him over with the Lakers for the two championships with the Lakers. So this is a guy that's been a part of 8 different NBA championship teams. And when I hear Kobe say that quote, I'm like, man, that's George Mumford's work and how
Okay.
impactful it is. And it's awesome.
Yeah. So, uh, all the pieces of that you mentioned, like there's sort of four stages to that, and it sounds like it's not trying to push emotions away, but allowing them to maybe flow through you in a way. And what does it mean with no judgment for an athlete?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of athletes, they'll come in here and they'll say things like, I know I shouldn't think this way, or I know I shouldn't feel this way. And to me, that's where the judgment comes in, is I have this thought and shouldn't think it because it's a negative or bad thought. Whereas mindfulness is just saying thoughts are just thoughts, emotions are just emotions. They're not good or bad. They just are. And so we
Hmm.
can just allow them to be what they are, and then we can label them. Okay, this is nerves, this is anxiety, this is frustration. And now we have a little bit of space between us and the experience of that thought or emotion or feeling so that now we can make a more effective decision of what we're going to do in the presence of those things. So we're not trying to get rid of anything, we're not trying to change anything. We're noticing so we can be aware of what's happening, and then we're accepting. And this is the thing that I want to emphasize, right? Because a lot of times people think that if I accept something, that means that I'm just admitting defeat,
Hmm.
or that I'm just being complacent, or that I'm agreeing with something. Acceptance has nothing to do with any of those things. Acceptance is essentially just about acknowledging what is already happening instead of fighting it.
Okay. I think I read another post you had that relates to this, where you were talking about taking sort of like the I statements out of it. Like, do you remember this? It's like not that I'm nervous or that I'm anxious. It's that they're. Can you explain that better than
Yeah,
I can right now?
yeah. So for sure. So kind of the premise of that is anytime I say that I am something, now it's tied to my identity and who I am as a person, right? And so it becomes a very fused thing. But anytime I can say this is anger, or I'm noticing that I'm feeling angry in this moment, now we're kind of teaching our brain that this isn't who I am. This is just something that's a part of my experience in this moment. And so it kind
Hmm.
of creates that separation between myself and my identity and an experience in the moment.
Okay. Um, I would imagine that most athletes like think about this when they're in a slump, or they've made a mistake of some kind. But I feel like there's just as big a traps with success also at certain times. I mean, what's been your experience in working with athletes at both ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, so it's and this is why I love working with athletes, because most athletes are have very high standards and very high expectations. And it's kind of a double-edged sword with them. And we have this conversation all the time, is it's those high standards and high expectations that have gotten you to where you are currently. But ironically and tragically, sometimes it's those unrealistic perfectionistic standards that are keeping you from reaching your fullest potential. Um, and
Hmm.
so that really creates an interesting discussion around how can we draw the line, or where do we draw the line between high standards, high expectations, and perfectionism? Because once we set perfectionism as the goal, then we just kind of keep ourselves stuck in this perpetual loop of not attaining something and then feeling frustrating and now turning it into a personal attack against me and my abilities, versus just kind of more of the mindful approach is taking it for what it is. Okay, this one specific period of practice didn't go the way I wanted it to go, and it's frustrating. And now I get to decide, okay, so what do I do with this information? I can try to suppress it. I can try to pretend it doesn't exist. Those things intuitively sound like they would make sense and be helpful, but research shows that it's actually counterintuitive, and it's better to just acknowledge it um, objectively, and then kind of step into the driver's seat and say, okay, bringing some of these feelings, thoughts, emotions along for the ride. What is it that I can commit to in this moment that's going to be the most helpful thing for me to do?
Okay. And when you think of your role as a coach, I mean, coaching, being a member of a team involves a lot of practice, and so what are some of the effective ways that athletes can practice mindfulness or practice this approach to their sport and to their life that are maybe the easiest for our audience to understand?
Yeah, I think that, and I got done talking to three athletes in a row about the same concept. So it's the framework of notice, accept, action. And so the first part of it, and this is very mindfulness, is just noticing what's happening internally and externally, right? So I walk outside, oh, I notice that it's raining, okay? Or I notice that the sun's out, sort of thing. Or I notice that I might be feeling a little bit anxious in this moment, or that there's some uneasiness, or that I'm feeling really good and confident and whatever else. And then the second part is, can I learn how to just accept what is without trying to resist or change? So that part is walking outside, seeing that it's raining instead of spending effort and energy saying, yelling at the sky, saying like, why are you raining? Stop raining. I don't like the rain. We're just saying, okay, so it is raining. I don't have to like it, but it is what it is. And now that kind of helps inform the third part, which is committed action. So, in the spirit of trying to accomplish or being in alignment with what matters most to me in this moment, what's the most effective thing for me to do right now? And can I commit to that? Maybe it's continuing to walk through the rain because I got to get to class and it's not fun, but it's just what I need to do, sort of thing. Or maybe I find an umbrella, or maybe I get in a car and drive or something. So, that framework, though, of just noticing and noticing how we kind of respond and relate to different thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and then the practice of acceptance, and then taking committed action. And that's a big part of this discussion is helping athletes identify, okay, so what are your goals? What's your why? What are your values? Because now in those moments, let's say some sort of uncomfortable thought or feeling shows up, we think that thoughts and emotions get to dictate what we do or what we don't do, and sometimes they certainly do, 100%, right? But we also have to understand that they're great informants, but they're not always the greatest dictators. And so if we don't rely on our emotions or our thoughts to dictate what we do or what we don't do, then what else can we turn to in those moments? And that's where values and goals and purpose come into play.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if you watched the end of the Steelers Ravens game the other day, and I was thinking about that. Both kickers, in such high stress situations. I saw something that said that the Ravens situation was the first time in NFL history it was a game-ending kick that determined like which team would go to the playoffs or not. I don't know if nerves had anything to do with why he missed it, but what can athletes do in that situation? Like when it's the moment to put themselves in the best position to succeed.
Yeah, that was heartbreaking to watch. A, because one of my good friends and former teammates at BYU, Kyle Van Noy, is a member of the Ravens, and so I was really pulling for him in that game, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of a bummer that they're not making the playoffs now. And just because I know, just from my own experience being on a team with kickers that have missed kicks or gotten a kick block, and now being kind of a coach on a team with kickers and specialists, and just seeing the amount of work and you know, dedication, persistence they put into their craft, and in that moment to not be able to execute the way you want to, it's gut wrenching. It
Mm-hmm.
just sucks. There's no way to
Yeah.
silver line it. No
Yeah.
sugarcoating. But that it's something that needs to be trained. And this is what I help the athletes understand all the time is if we wait until we're in those moments to try to figure out how to relate effectively to some of those feelings and emotions that are showing up, it's too late because we're going to
Mm-hmm.
revert back to sympathetic nervous system fight or flight, and we're just going to revert back to what feels the most doable and safe in that moment, which might not be the most effective thing. But if we can find ways to train pressure situations or have them come up with a system of, okay, when I do feel this way, or when this emotion or feeling does show up, what is it that I'm going to commit to doing that's going to help me most effectively navigate that situation? And so for a lot of athletes, it starts with breath work. And I always smile when I say this because when I was an athlete here at BYU and I would have heard someone talking about breath work, I would have been like, man, this guy's a hippie and, all this woo woo stuff. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's to each their own. I love it. But what we know from the research and the science is when we talk about how to train the nervous system from more of a sympathetic nervous state of functioning, so it's like more of the fight or flight response down to the parasympathetic, more calm, clear decision making mode of functioning. Breath work is one of the most effective ways to do that. And that's something that we always have control over. And so
Hmm.
that's I spend a lot of time focusing on we have to add breath work and extended exhale breath work specifically as a component to help effectively navigate those really high pressure, um, intense nerves moments because we're not going to get rid of them. And I think that kind of goes back to the point of why this is so important is we can spend all the time in the world trying to remove nerves and anxiety and emotions, but it's just the nature of being a human being.
Right.
And my approach is let's expect that it is probably going to happen, and then let's have a plan for how we're going to effectively navigate it when it does happen. And it usually involves some sort of breath work and then some sort of either self-talk phrase or cue that's within their control that they can focus on and executing their process.
Okay, that's fascinating. How have you noticed your field change or the issues that athletes are dealing with, if they've changed at all? Just in a, everyone's talking about sort of a new world of college athletics, and maybe you have athletes that just transferred there, and you haven't had a chance to build a long-term relationship with, or athletes who are now not only trying to succeed on the field and in the classroom, but are managing a marketing campaign for themselves, on social media. And we know that social media in and of itself can be a hazard for people, especially young people. Has you have been in this business for 50 years, but I'm sure even in the 5 to 10 years you have been, like, things have changed. What are the biggest changes you've seen?
Yeah, I would say just the overall pressure and expectation to win all the time, I think is very prevalent now, especially with how much money is involved in college sports and these athletes, having the opportunity to get paid now.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, of course, the social media thing, and that's the double-edged sword that I talk about with the athletes that I work with, is it's how they build their brand and increase their NIL value, but it's also the same place where they go on and they get DMs from all these keyboard warriors that, tell them to kill themselves and tell them, they're the worst ever and all these obscenities and profanities. And so yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance and you got to learn how to, navigate it effectively, or you can get carried away by it. And you go on any post, and you probably see this all the time with Vanderbilt football or athletics. You know,
Hmm.
any post from any game, whether it's a win or a loss, there's just comment after comment about who sucks and who needs to get fired and who's the worst. And it's, these are young minds, 18 to 22, sometimes 25-year-old individuals, and it's hard to not be affected by those things. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I would say that, and then I would just say kind of with the this year in particular, because of the cuts, the NCAA's decision to limit the roster sizes, I would say that pressure was felt immensely by a lot of athletes because now it turns into, oh, it's not just a bad rep in practice or a bad practice. It's, oh, I had a bad rep in practice and now I'm probably going to get cut, sort of thing, which is much
Yeah.
more of kind of how it was in the NFL. The stakes are just a lot higher, which a lot of times can raise the pressure and increase the angst if you don't learn how to navigate it effectively.
Okay. Um, it seems like the stakes have gotten a lot higher for athletes at younger and younger ages now also. I mentioned I've got 12-year-old travel baseball player, and I know you've been working with high school athletic directors to introduce these topics. Like, what would you say the state of mental health concerns is for kids at a younger age? And what advice do you have either for parents or coaches or schools on, like, when and how to bring along the mental health coach along, with the on the field or on the court coach? How does this get introduced into a culture maybe that hasn't had it before?
Yeah, I mean it's a big issue, and I think not necessarily because we know that the mental health of just young people in general, adolescents, pre-adolescents, is rising. And so that's been an issue and it continues to be an issue. And there's a number of different reasons for that. Social media, just generational shifts, pressures of life, that sort of thing. But I do think, especially in the sport world, because of how much more emphasis is placed on it, is I think there's a lot of identity issues and then a lot of burnout issues where young people are starting to attach themselves to so many different outcomes and performance variables and that athlete identity that they just don't really know who they are outside of that world. And then they invest so much time and effort and energy into that world that they're so burned out that by the time they even get to college, it's like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore, sort of thing. And
Mhm.
so that kind of brings up the next point, this question of, when do you involve a mental performance coach or mental health coach? It obviously serves me well to say this and have this opinion and to be biased towards this, but whether I was a mental performance coach, therapist, or not, I don't think that it's ever too early to start trying to implement some of these basic mental performance and mental health principles with kids. Like, for example, I listened to a mindfulness meditation with my daughter the other night, um, just to kind of see what she thought of it. And her reaction without me prying or anything was, I feel so calm and so peaceful. Can we do this every single night? And it was just like 10-minute little mindfulness meditation. And and she was like 10 at the time, you know? So I think that young minds and young people are actually a lot more capable of learning and implementing these skills and tools than sometimes we give them credit for.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I've already pushed this way over the time that I promised Braden, but this is a fascinating discussion. I'm really glad to meet you. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Hope you get a chance to come to Nashville sometime. Love to meet in person. You do a lot of writing about this field for people who are interested in following you. I think you have a podcast of your own also. Like, how can people keep up with your thoughts on mental health and mental sports performance online or other spots?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I spend most of my time on Instagram, and my handle is just at Dr. Braden Brown, my name, Braden Brown. And then I also recently partnered with a company called Impact Ed. We referenced that. They also have a social media presence and a weekly newsletter through Substack that's Impact dash Ed. And that's where myself and then one of my partners, we do weekly kind of mental playbooks where we talk about a lot of these principles that I think are very applicable to not only sport but just life in general. And that's why I love it so much.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to get that the 10-minute podcast that you listen to with your daughter. I'll listen to that with my kids as well. And I'll be following you online from here on out. So Braden, again, thank you. Sounds like the Cougars are in good hands with you there, and continued good luck.
Well, I appreciate that, Andrew. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for the kind words. And let's get you out to Utah one of these days to come to a couple BYU sporting events.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Thank you so much. All right, man. Take care.